Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone. It's Kelly from Kelly's Astrology here. Welcome back to another episode of the show. I'm going to take a look at the astrology for the very end of November, the week starting November 25th. So I'm kind of calling this the messy full moon Monday episode. Let me tell you what I mean by this. The end of November brings a full moon in Gemini, and this is a kind of messy full moon. That's thanks to an aspect from Mercury to Neptune. The full moon also comes just a few days after a frustrating aspect from Mars in Sagittarius to Saturn in Pisces. So there's a couple of themes that I want to highlight in today's show and kind of tie them all into this full moon, which is happening on Monday, November 27th. First up, I want to make sure you have the code to save 20% on my Black Friday sale, which is happening this week. That code is Radiance20. So enter that code when you check out at kellysastrology.com, and you'll be able to save 20% on most of my online courses, classes, and astrology trainings. And I'll share that code in the show notes below. I know with my accent and vowels, sometimes what you're hearing might not be what the actual code is. So check the show notes below for the code itself. So the featured astro event that I do want to explore this week is that full moon in Gemini. So it's happening on Monday, November 27th in most locations. It'll be early in the morning for you if you're in the US and Canada, and it's around the middle of the day if you're in Europe and the UK. And that full moon will come later in the day into the late afternoon, early evening if you're in Australia. So that's all on Monday, November 27th. The full moon is happening at 4 degrees of Gemini, so it's very early in the sign of Gemini. Now, because this full moon is happening so early in the day on the 27th, for those of you who are in the US and Canada, what I want to mention is that, and really I think for most of us, the moon is going to look really full and really bright on Sunday night and on Monday night. So we're on Sunday and heading into Sunday night, we're in the building, kind of developing stages of the full moon. And then we go into the peak of the full moon on Monday. But in general, some of these full moon kind of mood qualities and themes and influences, you may feel them on Sunday as much as you feel them on Monday. So I just wanted to mention that you might, technically the full moon is happening on Monday, but you might be feeling it on Sunday and Monday, the 26th and 27th. I'm just getting over a cold, so I apologize if I have to sort of pause to clear my throat. So when the moon is full, so every time we have a full moon, we get this sense of feelings and emotions running high. There's this heightened quality about both energy, kind of activation, stimulation, as well as insight. And each full moon brings the potential for a revelation or a realization. So at a full moon, the moon is as big and bright as she gets, so much so that the moon is equal to the sun. And that creates inside us a few things. It creates more light so we can understand things or we can see things through that light of the moon. But there's also this desire to balance light and dark, or head and heart. And what we're really looking to do under a full moon is to bring things that have been unclear into a place of understanding. Like you want to understand those around you and you want to be understood by others as well. And there is this sort of heightened kind of water quality that happens inside all living things under a full moon. And water in astrology is synonymous with emotion and feeling. So being more emotional under a full moon, feeling things more deeply, or being more sensitive is a very common or typical response to a full moon. So this full moon is in Gemini, an air sign, a mutable air sign. And that's going to create a very strong, curious, and social theme. It highlights interaction, as if you don't want to be alone and you want to be around other people. This is definitely a stimulating kind of full moon, and you might be more expressive than usual, or you might want to engage with a wider variety of people and ideas. Discussion, debate, sharing of information, passing of juicy gossip or tidbits of knowledge. There's a lot of back and forward activated by this full moon. The full moon in Gemini, of course, emphasizes or activates the element of air. And that element in astrology is all about communication. It's about technology. It's about business and the marketplace. Air is also about movement, things that are dispersing or moving around, being mobile. And of course, air is about ideas, the intellect, human intelligence, and it's also about transparency, the idea of things being kind of clear and in flow. So with this full moon in Gemini being a mutable sign, we're also getting those mutable themes emphasized. Flexibility, being adaptable, and the changeable quality comes through as well. So the element of air and the quality or the modality of mutable do have some common themes. They're both about movement and about change. So this is a full moon that really indicates things being in flux or a lot of things being up in air all at the same time. Enhancing some of these mutable themes is the fact that in addition to the sun and moon being in mutable signs, the moon in Gemini and the sun in Sag, we've also got Mars, Saturn, and Mercury in mutable signs as well. Mars and Mercury are also in Sagittarius and Saturn is in Pisces. So we've got a lot of planets in mutable signs. So we have a lot of movement, we have a lot of flux, we have a lot of changing, flexible energy coming through. Now, Mercury's placement at this full moon is especially important because the full moon is in one of Mercury's signs. So that makes Mercury the ruler of this full moon in Gemini. So the full moon is in Gemini and it's ruled by Mercury in Sagittarius. So there's a little bit of like a double mutable theme here, again, reinforcing movement, change, and having to adapt because everything around you is just constantly changing. So Gemini and Sagittarius, I would consider to be the two more active or outwardly oriented mutable signs. Gemini, of course, being air and Sagittarius being fire. The other two mutable signs, Pisces and Virgo, are earth and water. So they're a little bit more passive, or they're a little bit less lively, if you like. And that's when we bring in the element plus the modality combination. So this full moon in an air sign in Gemini, ruled by Mercury in Sagittarius, a fire sign. And when we have fire and air together, we also get movement. Think about keeping a fire going. If you're having a campfire or a bushfire, or if you're having a fire on the beach, we need to make sure there's enough air coming in so that the flames keep going. And sometimes this is like information supporting the taking of action. Air and information and action and fire going together. So fire and air is some of the elemental signatures coming out under this full moon. And that's about movement. It's about heat. So it's about being motivated. It's about being passionate, and also about being fired up or angry or frustrated. And there's this arousing, activating, very dynamic quality that can be really inspirational, like it can uplift your spirits and motivate you to go out and go forth and do all the things. But it's also about whipping things up. So sometimes we end up in a bit of a frenzy and we're agitated about something or we're angry about something. So we can be whipped up in an inspirational way or whipped up in an agitated way. And in either scenario, we're going to be kind of flooded with this desire to take action and do something. And one of our greatest challenges under this full moon is to make our actions count, to do something that that actually moves you forward rather than just doing something to stay busy. So that's important. And I should also spell out too, for those of you who have a copy of your birth chart and are really familiar with it, This full moon in Gemini, ruled by Mercury and Sagittarius, really highlights that Gemini-Sagittarius axis in your chart. So think about the pair of houses, your Gemini-Sagittarius pair of houses, as an area of life or a set of topics in your life where you might be restless, you might be wanting to move things around, you might be wanting to stimulate and get things going in this area of your life. Like if you have Gemini and Sagittarius on the 2nd and 8th houses to do with money, cash flow, taxes, managing loans and debts, you might be really moving things around, wanting to get things going financially for yourself, just to give one example. Now, Mercury in Sagittarius has a lot of influence at this full moon because it's the ruler of the full moon, but Mercury in Sag has some technical challenges. So there's a lot of influence coming from a planet that is not performing at its best under this full moon in Gemini. And so Mercury in Sag, the two technical things that are kind of challenging Mercury right now is that Mercury is in one of its detriment signs in Sagittarius. So the big picture conceptual themes of Sag are kind of not in line with some of the detailed precision that Mercury usually likes. Mercury is also slowing down at the moment, so moving at a slower speed than normal because in mid-December, Mercury is going to go retrograde. So the retrograde isn't here yet, but I think this full moon Monday, the 27th of November, is going to feel very Mercury retrograde. So if you think about crossed wires, bloopers, misunderstandings, you're going to be on the right track for how this particular full moon in Gemini might be showing up. So this Mercury who's in charge of the full moon isn't at best capacity or full, capability. And so Mercury in Sag is big on ideas and concepts, but very hazy on the details and certainly not clear on the specifics. So you might have some big visions or goals in mind, big dreams that you're going for, but no practical plan or no step-by-step guideline as to how that's going to come together. So story and motivational themes, as well as conceptual topics like philosophy, meaning, and purpose might be on your mind under this full moon in Gemini, ruled by Mercury in Sag. But Mercury in Sag is so expansive that you might find you're grappling with more questions than you can actually hold in your little human brain, in the sense that these questions are big and they're existential and they're about whys, the big whys of life. And that might be a little overwhelming. That might feel like leave you with a little bit of a brain frazzle at some points. It also indicates that clear answers are likely to be hard to come by under this full moon in Gemini. So we just want to be aware that there's a lot going on without necessarily being able to solve the problems. There's a lot of questions, a lot of conundrums, but we don't have the answers yet. We don't have what we need to come up with solutions yet. Now, at the time of the full moon, Mercury in Sag is going to be forming a square aspect to Neptune in Pisces. And that's not a great aspect for Mercury. It adds themes of confusion. It enhances that foggy, cloudy kind of quality. It means we're going to all have to slow down and move at a much more measured pace. And Mercury square Neptune creates this general tone of uncertainty. Like, I'm not sure, I can't see, I can't figure it out. And so we're going to have to let go of trying to solve every situation in our life logically. And we're going to have to develop some trust for our more subtle senses, that kind of belly wisdom. We're also going to have to slow down and give things more time to unfold. So we're kind of moving at that pace of that sort of inner wisdom or that subtle awareness, which is much slower than, the zippity zap of modern life with things moving around so quickly. When I'm working with clients who are having this type of Neptune transit to Mercury in their birth chart, we talk a lot about this as a time to take information or perfect seeming promises and opportunities with a grain of salt. Things are not all as they seem when Mercury squares Neptune. It's also a time when you're going to need to double check details, as it's very easy to overlook or miss something relevant under a Mercury-Neptune aspect. This is very idealistic and it's very hopeful, but it's not grounded in facts or reality yet. So you might find yourself maybe gossiping or passing on info that you later find out isn't true. So that's the kind of Mercury-Neptune energy that is coming through with this full moon. And that means that this full moon in Gemini comes with a little bit of a caution. It's a time where you want to be really careful about not overextending yourself, making plans or promises that you can't keep. A friend of mine talks about this from a money cash flow perspective of like you're writing checks that you're not going to be able to cash. So you're overextending. And that's the caution with this full moon in Gemini, ruled by Mercury and Sag square Neptune, is that we believe all things are possible. We might be unrealistically optimistic. And so we can get ourselves into a couple of messy situations by saying that we'll be in 3 places at once at 2:00 on Tuesday. And then we're like, oh my God, of course I physically cannot do that. Now we have to untangle the mess. So there's a lot to keep in mind with this full moon. And, the idea here of not wanting to overextend yourself, needing to review details, go over terms and conditions as much as you can. What are you agreeing to? What is the return or exchange policy? Don't assume that you know what it is. And ideally, I'd encourage you to delay any big decisions, big purchases, or important paperwork until Wednesday or Thursday, well after the full moon itself. And certainly, or even ideally, once the moon has left Gemini and moved into Cancer. And then there's like a whole different energy that's coming through. There's one other aspect that adds its own qualities into the full moon that I want to mention briefly. And this is the Mars square Saturn aspect. Now, this aspect peaks on Saturday, the 25th. So it actually comes into its full strength just a couple of days before the full moon, but it's going to be reactivated by the moon in the hours just before the full moon. So once the moon comes into Gemini, it kind of interacts with Mars and Saturn in quick succession, sort of drawing out that Mars-Saturn square aspect. So that'll be late Sunday or Monday, depending on where you are. Now, a Mars square Saturn aspect is an aspect of frustration. It's an aspect of caution. It's about realizing the consequences of being impulsive or impatient. And Mars square Saturn can help you reconnect with the value of slowing down, of planning, and of preparation. That said, with Mars square Saturn, we're going to need to make adjustments. That's what the square aspect indicates. You might need to scale back or to simplify or minimize your plans and expectations. We're not with some kind of realistic, like a realization or the rub of reality, a time limit, a financial limit, an energetic limit, a previous commitment means that what we thought we were going to do is not what we're going to be able to actually do. And anytime Saturn comes into the mix, we each get this reminder about being frugal, about being thoughtful and deliberate. And we're asked to devote energy and effort towards longer term, top priority goals rather than short-term desires or kind of like that impulsiveness. So with Mars square Saturn, one of the big challenges that we often navigate as humans with this is short-term versus long-term and immediate gratification versus delayed gratification. And 9 times out of 10, Saturn is the one to follow, and that is delayed gratification, slower long-term things that might seem boring today, but are going to be really protective in the future. So if we put all this together, which I know is a lot, but this full moon is very complex. It's one way of describing it. There is a very complex, multi-layered pattern that this full moon is going to form the center of. It brings together the sun and moon, which we get at every full moon. But in addition, this full moon also brings in that Mars-Saturn aspect. And that can create this feeling of being pulled in multiple directions at once, or having to dig deep and be really clear and firm about expectations as well as about boundaries and limits. There's a lot of maturing and kind of stepping into a more adult or grown-up kind of mindset that we're each going to have to do in different ways around this full moon on the 27th. Some of us might bump up against a boundary or a limit that is more firm and resistant to our pushing than we'd expected. And this might require tuning in to Saturn. We might have to slow down. We might have to be honest with ourselves or with others about what we can and can't do. And it's likely that we're each going to have to say no to something that we were maybe really looking forward to. So for all of those reasons, I'm calling this a kind of messy and pressured full moon between the Mercury square Neptune aspect, which is like confusion personified, and then the involvement of Mars and Saturn, which has got that reality, pressure, adjustment piece. It looks effortful. This full moon is complex and complicated. There isn't a simple answer or solution, and likely things are going to take more time than you would like. So it's effortful, it's a bit chaotic, and it's a bit messy. And it's sort of a really kind of messy combination of astrological pieces. It's only going to be in play for just these few days, 26th, 27th, maybe a little bit on the 25th. And then we move into different things. But it's such a central part of this last period of November that I wanted you to have a good understanding of all of the elements tied into this full moon, so that now you can understand the kind of astrological currents that you're kind of living and working with, and you can make your choices accordingly. And so I'd encourage you to slow down, to scale back, to simplify as much as you can, especially Sunday or Monday. Meeting our obligations to the people and projects that really matter will be important, but the reality of doing so will likely mean that we don't have the capacity or energy for extra or other requests and duties. If you can, honor the wisdom that emerges this week as Saturn shows up between the aspect to Mars and its involvement with the full moon. Try to regulate any reactive or impulsive responses that you notice yourself having. Observe the response. Oh, that's interesting. I feel really, fill in the blank, angry, frustrated, like wild or rebellious. And I'm going to make a more wise choice than acting on that kind of rebellious instinct. And if you do have a craving for wisdom or divine perspective and you want more astrology in your life, I would invite you to take advantage of my once a year sale and save 20% off a wide range of my astrology classes using that code RADIANCE20. I only do a sale once a year in this late November Black Friday period. So if there are webinars that you missed this year, if there are courses that you want to take, pop over to kellysastrology.com and check them out. I have more than 70 trainings on astrology, from short 90-minute standalone webinars to 6-part trainings that include reading and homework and feedback. So there's a wide range of material there depending on your level and your interest in astrology right now. Be gentle with yourself and your loved ones this week, everyone, under these very wild skies. Take good care, and I will be back to share more next week. Bye for now.